Welcome to the Professional Technical Interviewee. I'm Taylor Dorsett. In my 6-year career in technical recruiting, I realized that just about every company does technical interviews differently. Many very good senior engineers do not do well in technical interviews, despite being great developers. The only way to get better at interviewing is to practice. Many early career engineers don't really know what a technical interview is like until they're in their first one. Our goal here is to change that and shed some light on the technical interview. My guest today is Alex Behrens. He's a Chicago-based director of data at BuiltIn. We talk about technical interviews, we work through a technical problem together, and learn a little bit about his side business, roasting coffee. Hope you enjoy. Hello, Alex.
Hey, Taylor. How's it going?
Good. This is Alex Behrens. He is the director of data engineering at BuiltIn here in Chicago. He's a busy man because he also is the owner of Maple Leaf Coffee Roasters, which I've been a fan of for the last few years. And I assume,
loyal customer, yeah.
Yeah, loyal customer. And I assume you're drinking that today.
I am, yes. Unfortunately, I don't always drink the most exotic, latest thing from the shop. I drink a lot of the leftovers or stuff that I didn't want to sell. So I don't always drink the best of my own, but when I do appreciate it. So.
Well, great. Well, Alex, I know we've known each other for a couple of years, but I have been working through this podcast with the idea of bringing information about technical interviewing to people who either one haven't done a ton of that, or two, maybe this is just a skill that they want to work on, right? And I think the thing that I noticed through my career in recruiting is that every company does technical interviews in a different way, and sometimes even within the company, different individuals do them in different ways, and often the only way to get better at them is kind of through exposure and practice, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So could you just give a little background about yourself and kind of your current role and team?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, I'm in probably about the 16th year of my career at this point, give or take. I've had pretty diverse background in terms of the types of industries that I've worked in, the kinds of roles I've had. It's really been a very wide span for me, but there has been one common thread throughout almost everything that I've done, which is there's been some data centricity to the kinds of work that I've done. Whether it's been troubleshooting or working around data or leveraging some sort of big data technology. And every role I've had, whether it's been doing more SRE, DevOps kind of work, or front end or back end software engineering, there's always been that common thread of data being a common underlying piece. So when I was looking for a job earlier this year, around March, and for obvious reasons, there was a role that came up at a company that actually it turns out I knew some people at, which is BuiltIn, and they were looking for somebody to help take the data efforts of the organization from something that was sort of an afterthought into like a first-class citizen, as other engineers would refer to it. So they were really at an earlier stage of their maturity level with data, very much looking for somebody with experience and background. And I have another interesting set of experiences in the workspace, in that I've worked in big and small places. So I've seen organizations go from different sizes and different maturity levels in the way that they not only structure their teams, but also the way that they think about using information and leveraging that to better understand their users and offer exotic features to clients and things. So it's been a really interesting role for me. And whenever you, of course, work in a small place, your role only says so much. Your job description only says so much about your role. And these days, right next to the CTO, I'm the most senior technical resource on the team. So I spend a lot of time helping out with other teams, doing what would be more similar to platform engineering as well, in addition to the data engineering efforts.
Nice. Fantastic. I know usually my second question is if you've done any technical interviews recently, or
Mhm.
externally or for your team. But I know, like you said, you joined BuiltIn this year. I'm always curious though. Once you get later in your career, sometimes the technicals are maybe you're not whiteboarding anymore. Coding on screen. Sometimes it's more conceptual if there's a technical portion at all, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very different. I mean, the role drives so much of no matter the company, the role you're applying for drives a lot about the way that you'll be interviewed.
Mhm.
Obviously, the very easy dividing line is between individual contributors and people managers. Although even sometimes companies that have people management roles expect a certain level of competency around being able to write software and code and understanding the principles of software engineering. Um, there's definitely a very stark divide in those two types of roles. But I think from what I've experienced, once you've chosen one or the other, the breakdowns are fairly nuanced. If you are applying for an individual contributor roles, the differences will come based on the level that you're applying for. If it's a staff or entry or senior, or if it's a principal engineer position, and there's sort of a weird um, trade-off too that happens once you get to like a principal engineer level, in that you will be probably doing as much of a soft skill interview as you will a technical skill interview.
Sure.
So you may still have some sort of code challenge or whiteboarding session or things like that, but even those questions may be more conceptual, and they'll be less like, let me just see that you can solve this algorithmic sorting problem with a couple lines of code. So it's very curious the contrast that you start to see at different levels, even within the individual contributor space. And it stands in stark contrast to people managers skills, where they more ask about your ability to seek common ground and to manage multiple teams and disparate efforts and product goals and things like that. So obviously that's a very stark contrast between those two sides. But even within, once you break them down, it's very different levels.
Yeah. Have you built a team or brought people on board since you've joined BuiltIn?
I have, yes. So we have brought one new person on my team right now, and I've been part of interviews for a decent number of folks for other teams as well. And that's also come with the need to, at least for my team, to design the interview process, not from scratch necessarily, but I think one of the greatest ways for a team to bond is to think about what skills do we have now, what skills do we want to find, how will we find them in a way that actually gets us an answer that we like, and how do we design an interview process um, that not only tells us what we need to know to be able to say whether this person will be a good fit, but also be something that the people on the team would themselves want to be interviewed with. So we've as every engineer has had, we have different experiences with interviews in the past. So one of the marks of pride that I have on my team is that we did take a very conscious effort and are adjusting our interview process quite a lot from time to time to make it so that when we don't get something out of a certain process for a current candidate, we change it to try to get something better the next time.
Yeah, interesting. That's an interesting, I think a very probably helpful perspective, as well as like building an interview process that you would actually want to go through, right?
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
I had a couple clients in the past who, I think to varying different effects, maybe to different results, would have their senior engineers go through their own process, right? And I think that was eye
Hmm.
opening for a lot of, one, the interviewers, but two, just the company as a whole, going, oh, I don't even know if we would, rehire some people who are great on our team if they went through our process again, right? Which
Yeah, yeah.
is
Well,
interesting.
that speaks to the fundamental problem that interviewing is a glimpse, right? It's very much a relatively small snapshot, especially if you expect somebody to be on your staff or your team for in excess of a year.
Yeah,
This you could go multiple days, multiple sessions, things like that, but there's always a time cost that you're asking people to spend time with you so that you can evaluate who they are and make sure they're going to fit. So you want to be as fair as possible in an interview process, because it's somebody's giving you their time, and that's not free, right? They're having to change their own schedule or accommodate your needs depending on if it's coming to an office or setting aside a remote interview time. So it's really important to be thoughtful about it, because that does give an impression to the person that you're interviewing. And you really do need to make the most of that time. And if you don't, then you're just, it's a waste of time for everyone involved.
They could be at their coffee shop, right?
Yeah,
Do you have a standardized system? You talked about you had to build this your interview system this year, right?
yeah.
I guess one, feel free to share as much as you'd like to about it. But two, how'd you go through that process? I mean, are there things you're looking for in particular? Like we need X, Y, and Z skill set, or is it more kind of ability to learn or technical know-how? I guess what does that process look like?
Yeah. For what it's worth, I think it's important, no matter the team that you're on, it's important for every member of the team to have the option and not the obligation to participate in an interview. So the thing that I look for in teams, but also in interviews, are sort of a very similar element, which is a complementary skill set, something that
Mm,
you can balance the good and bad, or the strengths and weaknesses of people off each other, and that applies towards interviews as well. So I have certain things that I look for in interviews, which it's been a long time since I've really felt compelled or like I was in the best position to be a person that would rate the very specific technical abilities of an individual.
mhm.
And I really rely on a couple members of my team to take the lead on that, and I trust their judgment, because I know the quality of the work that they do, and the way that they think about quality software engineering. But I also try to poke some holes in some of their positions or arguments about a candidate if they do bring up something that I disagree with, or some way I think it's unfair. But really, I do rely on people to do different parts of the interview for me, and to bring different considerations to the table about a potential candidate. So for me, what I'm always been looking for, probably in the second half of my career, is more about potential for people that aren't providing, like applying towards a principal level engineer.
Mm.
So if there's anybody that you're finding for a lower management position, or any individual contributorship position, it's this combination of what could this person potentially do to complement the skill sets on the team. What are we missing right now that we need to find? And then where could this person grow over 6 months, over a year, over 2 years? And that's a very hard thing to rate, right? Like
Sure.
you have zero certainty and potential. It is in some respects a gut feeling, but it also is in some respects a lot of questions that I try to ask about. What do you like? What don't you like? And it's not, could you please take a shit on your former employer or your current job? But every person that you're interviewing should, at least that I've ever interviewed, I respect people who have answers about things that they don't like. If I ask them about a programming language, to criticize it, even if it's one that I really really love, because nothing is perfect.
Yeah.
And that's how I try to pull some of those answers out of people, to try to get a sense of, like, where have you grown in the course of your career. And even if you're just applying for an entry level position, that's definitely still a question you can answer. You don't have to have had 10 years experience, 5 years experience, any number of years, to be able to say that you've grown in some way as an engineer, as a human being, as a coworker, as a colleague in some ways. And that's the kind of stuff that I really like to dig into, because I want to learn from those people, right?
Mhm.
That's where I like to find people on the team for my own, like, narcissism, that can make me a better manager and a better engineer. And if I can find folks that have grown, that have potential, hopefully something greater than my own, I can really learn from them too.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it seems like you really value that team fit, which is something that, um, I've had lots of clients in the past that really cared about that, and some who didn't. Right. As long as
Hmm.
you pass their
Hmm.
technical, you're going to get an offer. And some places said, yeah, I've places say this is the best developer we've talked to this year, but they don't fit with our team. Right. So it doesn't
Yeah,
make sense. Which is two very different viewpoints. But it also sounded like you touched on, people that have an opinion, but also are willing to kind of bring themselves to the interview to some extent, because I think in the long run, you end up getting to know the people you're working with, right?
of
It's
course.
really
Yeah.
difficult sometimes to get that in the interview process. But I hear more and more people say, like, one, you should be yourself at work, but two, bring yourself to those interviews, because if
Mhm.
you're kind of shielding some of that, or maybe afraid to, bring that to the interview, then you might not actually get to know the people all that well during the interview process, and it might not be a good fit for you, right? Once you actually
Yeah,
get there.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, interviews are such a, as I was saying, it's a small glimpse into who somebody is, and it's not everyone interviews well.
Mhm.
And I'm a person that, when you're asking technical questions, if you ask me to do a programming assignment kind of thing, like I have historically done very poorly at those, because I enjoy working with other people. I enjoy being someone that maybe sometimes spends some time looking at code on my own and thinking about problems, but then I really rely on the opinion and feedback of others. And of course, when you're interviewing, a lot of times you're answering questions by yourself. It's like dating, right? Like you don't really get a good impression of somebody. Maybe sometimes the first hello or first introduction, and a lot of times having a good interview process isn't so much about just asking good questions and making sure that you as the interviewer show up, but also in trying to as a management sort of vibes go, like making the conditions for the person that you're interviewing to be successful at that interview, even if you end up not hiring them.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes about knowing who you're talking to, because everyone's style is different, right? And it's just because someone is a wizard at solving a programming problem doesn't mean they'll be a good fit. Just because somebody came up with a clumsy answer, you got to talk to them about it. You got to dig in. You got to let them explore and expand on it and be open to that kind of thing is maybe not everyone's vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned, not as many take home exercises or technicals during this process, this recent job search process, but in the past, you said you didn't feel like you did terribly well in technical interviews.
Yeah, I think whiteboarding exercises were things that I would do pretty well at. But take home assignment, programming kind of assignment things were things that I was never. I could do them. I never felt comfortable doing them. And I think it. I think for me, I would get a lot of times caught up in. Uh, I have a way that I would write this code, but I don't know if it's going to be satisfactory because every company's standards and expectations are different.
Hmm.
And that's maybe like a short way of saying I'd make a better architect than an engineer sometimes, because I can draw boxes and arrows and tell you about how things scale and how they might be deployed and so on and so forth. But if you ask me to sit down and come up with a heavily optimized sorting algorithm for something, I'd probably suck pretty hard at it. And it's not because I'm a bad engineer, but it's just that my brain applies to those problems differently than other people's do.
Yeah.
So it's just never been a strong suit for me. We do a take home technical interview at BuiltIn right now, at least for the data team. But we try to be very explicit about the outlines and the expectations for it, that it isn't about how you write code or how you solve or what the problem solution is necessarily, but it's more a way to see how do you solve a problem? How do you solve a problem that we face a lot of times in our team? And we have a 45-minute, it's usually gets to about an hour. We have a discussion with people where we ask them to talk about the solution. We asked them to talk about what scale and how you would take it, what they thought of the problem. So we try to be very explicit that it's not about how you write code; it's about how you solve problems. And
Hmm.
it's not there is no known way to solve this problem. There are many ways to do it, and all of them are correct.
Yeah. I really like that mindset of it's a problem that you actually have day to day, right?
Yeah,
At work. I think that's potentially difficult for people if they haven't run into something like that, but incredibly relevant for the actual job, right? Versus
yeah.
reversing a binary tree where, are you ever actually going to do that, right?
Now, Betty. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have a system in the past when, if you were doing a whiteboarding exercise or like a live coding exercise to try to break down the problem?
For me personally, yeah, the whiteboarding exercises were always a little bit easier for me. Usually, if I'm going to try to break down or start to solve quote unquote, the problem in an interview process, I'll probably start by asking more clarification questions. Sometimes people put a problem to you or ask you to, not document, but to draw out a solution to something. And depending on who the interviewer is, they may or may not have a really good way of expressing or asking the question. So you want to kind of dig a little bit more, right? Like if they're saying, we have a system that shows statistics or information, what kind of system, how would you design the system? And say, okay, well, what's the requirements? Tell me what technologies you have on hand. If you don't have specific answers to these questions or you don't care about them, then I will spend less time talking about specific implementations, but more abstract ideas about like a messaging bus instead of Kafka or Kinesis. I won't talk about like a database technology type. I won't say like document versus relational, but I'll just start out with like, you need a place to store stuff. Today it could be this, tomorrow it could be that. So you really want to first explore, at least this is the way that I've always handled these, explore a little bit more about what the question is so that you really start from a position of like, I'm trying to answer what it is that you're asking. And part of that is like, it's really this idea that sometimes people will be considerate and not interrupting you if you start to answer a question in a way that they don't want you to. So you want to make sure first before you start to go down a path, as sometimes if you put a whiteboard marker in my hand and let me start drawing on a board, it'll be a little bit tough to interrupt me. Like you'll want to make sure that you're going to answer in the way that they're looking for, not that you want to be right or wrong, but that you're actually getting to the root of the problem and making sure that you understand it. So I'll spend a little bit of time getting to there. And then once I kind of have that pinned down a little bit, I'll start to talk about like things in phases, right? And this is the natural part of software engineering, that we all know that whatever code you write today, whatever system you design, it's very unlikely that it will stay that way permanently. So you can talk about why and this is something I've done a lot, why I would put it together this way first. But a lot of times that it's that way just if it's a proof of concept, if I'm just getting something pushed out the door. But then I'll talk about, where the system would grow, where it would fail, what parts will work for the short term, what parts won't work for the long term. And then, that starts to kind of show a little bit that you're thinking about the problem on a bigger scale and a longer time frame than maybe they originally intended. And so that's usually where I'll go with things. And very rarely have I ever been parts of interviews where they'll start talking about a specific technology type. But, this is the part where if you do dig into a specific technology or a framework or a system, you got to be honest, right? You got to say, I think it works this way. I don't have a ton of experience with it. Or, you just can't make up stuff about like how a certain framework works and say that you for sure know it that way. You have to just make sure that you express what the depth to which you know something before you go too far with it too.
Yeah, I think that's really, really easy to get caught saying,
Oh yeah,
rather than saying, I'm not that familiar, here's my understanding, or I don't know. It's really easy to go, oh, I would do this, this, and this. And, there's an engineer sitting on the other side of the table going, I don't know what this person's talking about, right?
yeah.
But that's a lot of people's natural, inclination is
It
like,
is. It
oh,
is.
I'll
Yeah.
improvise around it, and it's difficult.
Yeah.
Do you have? I mean, those are certainly helpful. Any other kind of tips or advice for people that are going into technical interviews, or things to keep in mind?
Yeah. I didn't really answer the question about the take home assignment or actual code writing part of it. As I touched on, for me, those have always been a little bit tough. I try to start off with those with the same mindset that I do with the kind of whiteboarding exercises, which is someone gives you a problem, they describe it, hopefully they document it or describe it in a way that's really easy to unpack. Oftentimes that's hard, a programming assignment can be sort of a Rorschach test, that the description can sometimes be a bit tough to understand in the way that you think. So it's important to sort of ask. I mean, I think there's some assumptions that you should always make about take-home assignments, that are fairly safe. Like someone may not tell you that they expect you to write tests, but you better darn well write tests, right? Like don't not write tests because they didn't explicitly say we expect to see tests.
That has got to be one of the number one reasons
Yeah.
people didn't get moved through from just a recruiter perspective that I've seen over the years is like people saying, it was fine, but they didn't have any tests, and we do test-driven development here, right?
Yeah. I think even if you're not applying for a role that the organization has a TDD kind of approach, like you still got to put something in there, and that's like one of those basics that is just left unsaid, that if you don't have it, you're going to be in a world of hurt if you want to keep going in that process. But beyond that, pay close attention to specifics if they put them down. If they don't put down specifics, solve it in whatever way you want, but put in comments, put in documentation, put in anywhere that why you did it this way. Spend 5 minutes before you're ready to hit commit on that and say, I did it this way, but I know it won't work for these reasons, and just document that. If our process, our system, and those systems I've always liked to see are the one that, while they may ask you for an answer, they will also ask you to explain it, and they will talk to you about it. So they'll give you a chance to unpack what it is that you submitted, and not just like throw it over a wall and you have no idea what people thought of it. If there are many companies that don't have that kind of engagement, and I think it's sort of it misses something that could be said. So I'm not a huge fan of not having that conversation about a programming assignment, but in companies that do that, they really do need to zero in on asking specifics about a submission.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you give any different advice or any additional advice for someone who's early career?
Boy, that's tough. Early career interviews are incredibly hard. Maybe it's just because it's been so long since I've been in early career. So I feel like you have to, as an interviewer, you have to know where somebody is at the stage of their career, right? And be critical of the things that are appropriate for where they are. So it's not so much that you should judge every code submission equally. You should judge it in the context of an individual that is coming in, and for not only the title and the position and the level that they're coming in at, but where they are, what their background is, if they're somebody that's had a couple of years experience. And we see this a lot in the data side at BuiltIn. We'll get folks that have had data engineer titles, but they'll have two completely different skill sets. And you see sometimes in their code submissions a reflection of those different skill sets, even though they had the exact same title. And so you can sort of explain a little bit as to why a solution was put together in a certain way by virtue only of like the experience they've had in their current or previous role. So a lot of times for someone kind of first getting into it, aside from the make sure you write tests observation, you want to try to take something that or that you've done well yourself in terms of your own code writing, either in school or on your own or seen from other people. And I don't want to say reproduce it, but do your best to live up to things that you've seen before, and hope that the organization that you're applying to is one that will look at your submission in a way that is within context and isn't like expecting you to submit senior level code to an entry level position.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, great. Well, before we move on to the interview portion of the podcast, do you have any personal technical interview horror stories you're willing to share?
Yeah, maybe not on the technical side. I've had the experience at least once in my career with technical with interviews in general, and actually where maybe it's happened more than once. I feel like interviews need to be one of those things that a company coordinates and collaborates around.
Sure.
I've always been a fan, and I sort of stole a lot of this process from somebody that I work with for many years and has become a very good personal friend, that before you go into an interview process, you get together everyone that is going to take part in it. You talk about who the candidate is, what your experience is in talking with them already, if you had spoken with them. And then you make sure that the questions that each session is going to ask won't overlap. Not because they won't overlap because you don't want to you don't want to ask the same question, but because you want to, again, respect the person's time, not feel like they don't know who this person is or what job they're applying to, or just it just sucks, right? Like I've been parts of interviews, and it hasn't happened too many times, but I don't know how many times during the course of a 3 to 4 hour interview session, and I want to answer so tell me about who you are, or tell me about your current role, or whatever, right? Like you can summarize that up in a Google Doc that you share before the interview process.
Yeah.
You should not ask the same question multiple times. And if you ask the same question multiple times, then that sort of shows that like the company you're in doesn't really value the interview process all that well. So I've hated it when that happens. And I've had this experience, it was maybe about 10 years ago at this point, where I was probably, my mid to early 20s, when I was a little bit less diplomatic in some of my feedback loops, that I had couple hour long phone calls for a position, and then they had one more phone call follow up with me where they were like starting from scratch all over again. And the person asked like, so all the basic first round interview questions that I had spent 2+ hours answering over different dates phone calls. And I opened up to the fellow that actually, I remember this very clearly, that said, I appreciate your time. I feel bad, that I have to do this, but I'm just like, I'm not interested in continuing this because I just don't feel like you guys got this. I don't remember. I didn't say it that way. I said it more of a early 20s Alex jerky fashion. So it was not nearly as nice sounding as what I just made it, but I was not happy about it. And I just like, this is not a job for me. And I'm glad I made that conclusion.
Sure. As someone who did a lot of sales interviews and interviewed at a lot of places as a recruiter, I don't know if there's anyone less prepared for interviews than salespeople who are like walking off a call into the interview as someone hands them a resume, and then they go, all right, who are you? Right. And I think I'm really good at giving that a 30-second sound bite of like, here's my background. Yeah, definitely frustrating. Great. Do you want to grab more coffee before we go into it?
How did you know? Yes, and this will be the only break I take. Cool. All right.
Great.
See you
in 5. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcasting app at The Professional Technical Interviewee. I want to thank my guest and my wonderful editor and producer, Dustin Bays. If you're interested in sharing your technical interview advice and being on the show, please reach out at DorsettTaylorDev@gmail.com. As a reminder, this interview has 2 parts. You can find the second half, which is the live technical interview, on YouTube at The Professional Technical Interviewee. The link will be in the show notes. Until next time, keep practicing.